Hello, everybody, and welcome to our virtual tax school webinar series. My name is Amar Medic, and I am the product marketing manager here at TaxWise. TaxWise means business, and we're super excited to announce that new for 2024 tax season, tax preparers will be able to file business returns, Forms 1065 and 1120S, directly within our cloud-based solution, TaxWise Online. In today's webinar, we'll be covering business return basics. We will go over the ins and outs of the 1065 business return and walk you through the process of filing a partnership return using TaxWise Online. Keep in mind that we do try to host these webinars once per month, so feel free to join us in the future if you find today's session to be informative. During the webinar, you'll be able to submit questions to our team and get those answered live at the end. And with that said, I'm very pleased to introduce our main speakers for today, Beverly Henry and Ryan Hubbs. They're both solutions architects here at Wolters Kluwer with years of experience working in the tax industry, and they'll be sharing their insights on how to prepare business returns. So with that, let's get started. Beverly and Ryan, please take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's TaxWise Online Tax School webinar, focusing on Form 1065. Now, before we get started, can someone please type in the questions box that you can hear me and see the slide? And I
They
cannot
can hear
see
you
that.
and see the slide. I think
Okay,
so. Yeah, they can hear and
great.
see you.
Okay, perfect. Great. Well, welcome and TaxWise Online, your virtual tax office. It is a tax software solution to help you in the preparer market to prepare more tax returns quickly with greater accuracy and efficiency. Today's focus will be introducing those partnership returns, Forms 1065, that you will soon be able to prepare in TaxWise Online in November. Now, we have a lot of people attending today, so if you have any questions during the webinar, please type those in the questions box, and after the presentation, we will look for those, depending on how much time we have. And if you think of any questions after the webinar, please reach out to your sales consultant, and we'll work on getting those questions answered. All right, the next slide, please. I am Beverly Henry, one of your hosts. I am a CPA, previously working in public accounting for about 11 or so years before I came here to Wolters Kluwer a little under 2 years ago. And Ryan Hubbs, before coming to Wolters Kluwer, previously spent about 10 years working on individual, business, and nonprofits in public accounting. Now, Ryan and I are both solution architects, which means we show the many Wolters Kluwer solutions, presenting to you the tools in our software that create a more productive and streamlined process for you, so you are more profitable. Today, we're excited to be presenting TaxWise Online and what it is going to look like when the business returns roll out in November. Now, before we go into a live demonstration of the software, I'll be giving you a very broad overview. What are partnerships? What are partners? Before Ryan takes you into TaxWise Online. The next slide, please. So just a little bit about Wolters Kluwer. Wolters Kluwer has been a leader in software solutions for a lot of years now. We are the name brand in tax software, and we are reliable, and we've got your back. We are here for you. And at Wolters Kluwer, we continue to create and deliver innovative technology solutions that empower our customers. Our products and services are used by the Big Four, 94 of the top 100 firms in the United States, but we are not just for large firms. Thousands of firms of all sizes, all the way down to sole practitioners, use our solutions. We believe the needs of a small firm are just as important as big firms. And when small firms use our products, they get to leverage all that intellect that is built into our products and receive that same level of service. Next slide, please. So here are our objectives for today. We will talk about who files, Form 1065. We'll see how to report the partnership's financial information from a trial balance and what a Schedule K-1 looks like and how TaxWise creates it. Also very important, filing due dates. Because if those are missed, steep penalties can be imposed. And of course, Ryan will take you through an example of a Form 1065, what that looks like in TaxWise Online. And also, to make it more interesting, more fun, we are going to have some polling questions scattered throughout this webinar. All right, next slide, please. All right, coming to TaxWise Online. TaxWise Online is a browser-based tax software for those in the prepare market. Now, many of you have been using TaxWise Online, been using it for several years now to prepare 1040s. But coming this November, we are adding Forms 1065 and Forms 1120S. For other business types or trust returns, TaxWise Desktop is included, so you can still prepare those. But for today's presentation, we will just be focusing on partnership returns in TaxWise Online. And since TaxWise Online is a browser-based tax software, because it is in the cloud, you can access anytime, anywhere, on any device, a laptop, tablet, Chromebook, even a smartphone. As long as you've got an internet connection, it is your virtual tax office. Next slide, please. What are the more common types of business entities? The 4 common types of business entities that we usually see: corporations, S-corps, limited liability companies, and partnerships. As I mentioned, we will be looking at what a partnership is and then introducing how its income and expenses are reported on a tax return. Next slide. So what is a partnership? Per the IRS, a partnership is a relationship between 2 or more people to do a trade or business. Each person contributes money, property, labor, or skill, and shares in the profits and losses of the business. A partnership must have 2 partners. That makes sense. You have to have 2 people to be in a partnership and to file a partnership return. You cannot file a partnership return if there is only 1 person. Now, a partnership reports its income and expenses on a Form 1065. And then the next point. It is a pass-through entity, which means partnerships are not taxed as a separate entity. Form 1065 is only an information return, and it is not taxed. The tax is determined at the partnership level. Each partner will receive a Schedule K-1 from the partnership, and I guess you can click next. So the tax is determined at the partner's level. Each partner will receive a Schedule K-1 from the partnership, and that K-1, their K-1 shows what their ownership percentage is, their share of the partnership's income and expenses. And then the partners will take their K-1 received from the partnership, and each partner will report those amounts on their individual tax return, Form 1040. And a partnership return is due March 15th, and if extended, September 15th. Those due dates are important to remember because very steep penalties can be imposed on the partners for late filed returns. Don't miss a deadline because it can be very costly. A late filed partnership return, the last time I looked, I think it's $220 for each person who was a partner at any time during the tax year. And that can start to add up and continues for each month or each part month that it was filed late. So this might be a good time for a polling question on the next slide. What is a partnership? Let you guys read through that. All right. All right. C is, looks like.
Let's give everybody a minute or so. All right, I think we got the vast majority of people answer
Yeah.
C. So people are
Answer
listening.
C is correct. And it's not A, of course, because a partnership return is only an informational return. It doesn't pay tax. And it's not B because to have a partnership, you have to have more than one person for it to be a partnership. And of course, it's not D because due dates are March 15th and if extended to September 15th. Well, now this might be a good time for Ryan to take it and show us TaxWise Online, what it's going to look
Okay.
like.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, Beverly. So the way this presentation has been set up, so we'll be going in and out of PowerPoint and switching between PowerPoint and TaxWise Online. And as Beverly stated earlier, TaxWise Online is going to be our preparation software for today. And a couple things to kind of point out about this presentation. I will be going into the software 3 separate times. This first time will be a general overview of how to set up your partnership return, how to use the tax software. After that, we will be going and talking about how we're going to do the data input, how we're actually going to report the financial information that is within the return. And if you've done a 1040, when it comes to doing a business return, you're going to see that a lot of it is very, very similar. It can feel a bit daunting at first. But in my opinion, for the vast majority of partnerships or business returns, once you are comfortable with the inputs, I find it to be a little bit easier to actually get the data within the software. There's a lot less worksheets that you need to work with. And I'll be highlighting that throughout this presentation. And today with TaxWise, which I've just brought up on my screen, if you have TaxWise Online already, you're going to notice this looks extremely similar, right? Basically the same look, the same feel as a 1040 return. But even if you're using a different software, I think this screen right here is going to be relatable. And where we're at right now, where we're at right now is page 1 of the 1065. And if you've ever done a 1040, the first page of the return, at least the top portion that we are currently looking at, going to be very, very similar. This is where we're going to get the basic taxpayer information. Now, instead of it being for a husband and a spouse or an individual, or maybe you have some dependents, this is going to be for all of the partners. So all of the partners that are part of this partnership are going to fill out this one form. So don't feel like you need to fill out an individual 1065 for each one of the partners. Eventually, like Beverly was saying, and we're going to show this in the software, they're going to get a K1. That's what's really going to be recorded on their individual tax return. But going through this return here, I've already gone and set up some of the basic taxpayer information. I went ahead and gave it a name. Instead of social security number, we're going to be working with the EIN number. We still have to have an address as well. And as we scroll down, the IRS is going to want to know some additional information about, okay, what is the purpose of this company? What are they doing? But this is all very informational, right? I think some of the main things to really know is you will have to select an accounting method. Typically you're running into cash or accrual. It can kind of vary from business to business. If you need other, you can do that, but typically much less common. I think by and large, at least most of the people I work with are doing accrual, but you do run into cash every now and then. And when we get to this line here that says the number of scheduled K1s, well, this is really how many partners are going to receive a K1. And for this particular presentation, I've kept it simple. We just have 2 people, right? And we'll look at their K1s kind of towards the end of this. But to really talk about how we're going to navigate and how we're going to function throughout this tax return, as we get past the basic data input, you are going to see that we have an income section and a deduction section. And if you've ever done a Schedule C for one of your clients, this should be looking pretty familiar. Now, the input's going to be different, and we are going to talk about trial-based input, as this is how it's going to work within TaxWise Online, but we're really going to take a deep dive into this, and we will be doing that a little bit later on in this presentation. For the time being, really want to focus on some of the tools that are going to be at our disposal in order to make sure that we are getting this return done correctly. And on the left-hand side of our screen, I'm actually going to zoom in a bit so we can see it a bit easier. There is a tree that is color-coded. Now, the items within this tree are going to be one of 2 things. These are either going to be forms that we have specifically brought in to this tax return, or these are going to be items that have rolled forward. Now, since TaxWise Online is just coming out with the business returns, most likely, unless you're importing it from the desktop version, this will be information that you have to input. Now, when you first create the return, you are going to get the various pages for the 1065. Like I was saying earlier, if we scroll down, here are the K1s, and I have one for each one of the partners. And that's pretty much it. There will be something called the trial balance worksheet that we're going to work with heavily, and how we actually get to this or add in any additional forms into this particular tax return. So we're going to click the Add Forms button right here. And when we do this, it's going to go and bring up a search menu. And you can really use this one of 2 ways. If you know the exact form number that you need, you could just type it into this box. Or if you're not quite sure, but you kind of know the keyword, it's also a keyword search. So for today's example, I'm going to go ahead and type in trial. It's going to bring in our trial balance worksheet as the only option. Once I click add, it's going to add this to the bottom. And like I said, we will take a deep dive into this, but for the time being, do want to go over a couple more of the tools that are going to be within the software to make sure that you're getting through a return correctly. And if we bring our attention back to the tree on the left-hand side, you can probably notice that this is color-coded. And within TaxWise, just like with the 1040 returns, the software is going to be constantly analyzing the tax return to make sure that you are not missing any critical information that the IRS is going to require in order to file this return. And this color coding, I think, is pretty simple. We have green, we have red, and we have gray. Well, the 2 main categories are going to be green and red. As we go through, and let's just look at the different pages of the 1065. We have 5 pages here. We can see that page 1 is in green. Pages 2, 3, 4, and 5, these are all in red. Page 6 also in green. And what this is telling us is that any critical bits of information have been input, for example, to page 1 of the 1065. And when we go back to this and scroll down, you'll notice that the income and deductions are blank. So just to be very clear, it's not necessarily making sure that you've input the data correctly, but if we were to go to something like page 2, we're going to see a lot of red highlights for some of the boxes here. As we continue to scroll down, we can see some red highlights in these boxes. Well, this is the check that is being performed within the software. And as we were to go through and potentially start selecting these different items, you can see a lot of red boxes removed with just one selection. That's because the IRS does require us to report one of these types of partnerships to them. But once we check off one, all of these boxes have now been grayed out. And this is really going to be your first line of defense, especially if you're a bit newer when it comes to doing the business returns. This check is going to be constant. One of the nice things about TaxWise is there is no calculate button that's within it. As you go through and start inputting data field by field, tax software is going to be constantly updating, constantly analyzing the return for you. And as you go through this, if you were to remove all of these red items from, let's say, page 2 that we're currently looking at, that is when it would turn green. And as a general rule of thumb, if you have any pages, any forms, any worksheets that do have this red highlight to it, it's going to be your heads up, okay, this tax return is not quite yet done. However, there is going to be one more function that is built into the tax software just to really be your second line of defense and make sure that you're not forgetting anything. And that's going to be the diagnostics. Now, the diagnostics If you've ever done a 1040 return, typically run in conjunction with these items that are in red, where it'll take these items, it'll post it within the diagnostic report. Within a business return, though, it's going to be a bit different. We do have one error because we don't have our EFIN within this particular tax return, and this would be required. But you will focus much more on the warnings. Now, this tax return that I'm currently looking at, we don't have any data within it, so there are no warnings. But as we go through, and we'll come back to this, once we actually go and start inputting information, very likely that some warnings may appear. I think the most common one of these, and we'll kind of talk about this in a little bit, is if a balance sheet is out of balance. Now, there is not a balance sheet within a 1040 return, but more or less, and we'll look at this form, you are going to have to make sure that your assets are going to match your liabilities and your stockholder equity. And there's going to be a page of the tax return that's going to balance this or help you add this up to make sure that everything is in sync with one another, and that each sides of this equation do add up. And I would recommend, after you've ever done any real critical parts of the tax return, just do a quick diagnostic check. Just make sure there's none of these warnings. These warnings are going to be very important within TaxWise Online. And like I said, we will be taking one more look at it. Now, last little bit of just general overview information that we're going to go over before I turn this back over to Beverly to explain the trial balance and what this is going to be, is when it comes to the general navigation, one little tip or trick to show you is earlier we talked about how to add forms using the green add button. Well, let's go ahead and go back to page 1 of our 1065. And let's actually go and scroll down to some of the financial information. Well, for the different income sections that we are currently looking at, if you look at the bottom of each of these fields, you're seeing there's a lot of green underlines. If we come to something like cost of goods sold, we actually have a black underline. So these underlines are going to be very important within the software. It's really going to be explaining that if there is a green underline, this data is most likely pulling from either our worksheet or the trial balance, or this data may be a calculated field. It's adding up the above sections, or it's doing a multiplication, division, etc. If it's something that is in black underline, this is something where you could just go and type directly into the field. And just to kind of give you a sampling of how this works, if I try to type into the gross receipts or sales, saying this is a calculated entry, select the link options to see choices. Well, if I'm not quite sure where to go to input the information for it to flow through to page 1 of the 1065, what we are going to do is we are going to take our mouse. As I move it over these different fields, you're seeing there is a little arrow pointing to the right-hand side of the screen. And if I click on this little arrow, it will bring up some different options, but the one that I really want to focus on is going to be the first option that appears. TaxWise is going to use a linking system where if you need to find an input worksheet for having the data flow, once you click this link, it's going to give you two options. You're going to have one that says existing. You're going to have one that says new. In this instance right now, we're looking at existing. Well, we added in the trial balance worksheet earlier, so it's saying, okay, it could pull from here. If I were to click new, you always have the option to add in a scratch pad. And just to kind of visualize what a scratch pad is, this is just where you can type in your own information. You can give it a description, you can give it an amount, and that data would then flow through to the input worksheet. And very importantly, if we do add a scratch pad, it's going to be populating in our tree underneath of the page where the scratch pad goes. Now, I'm going to leave it blank for the time being, because really, once we get back into TaxWise for my next portion of this presentation, we really want to be working with the trial balance worksheet. This is going to be your tool to getting through tax returns, not only quickly, but also accurately. So with all that being said, I'm going to turn this back over to Beverly. We're going to go back into the PowerPoint, and we're going to talk about what a trial balance is and why this is going to be so important for preparing a 1065 tax return. Beverly, all you.
All right. There it is. This is an example of a basic trial balance. A trial balance is a financial report for the business entity, and in this case, for a partnership. Very basic trial balance we're looking at. You've got your account numbers over on the left. You've got the account names, petty cash, checking, accounts receivable. You've got your credits and your debits. And notice at the bottom, the debits and credits must tie. In this trial balance, we've got the petty cash, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and you'll see the capital accounts. There are two partners in this partnership. There's Charles and James, and it pretty much looks like Charles has about a 60% interest and James a 40% interest in this partnership. So Charles is going to be reporting on his 1040, 60% of the profits and losses of this partnership. Now you'll also see we've got gross receipts and then we've got some expenses. So a trial balance is basically, it's the balance sheet and the income statement combined. And a trial balance can be produced in the taxpayer's bookkeeping software, such as QuickBooks. And a fairly big difference between preparing a Form 1040 and a Form 1065 is with a partnership return. When you are preparing a Form 1065, you have a balance sheet. And Ryan's going to show you what that looks like. It is called a Schedule L in Form 1065, and it must balance. So let's go to the next slide just for a quick polling question. What is a trial balance? You can read those and see what you come up with.
Give everyone a minute.
All right. Looks like everybody has pretty much answered. Well, the answer is B. It is a financial report that reports the partnership's assets, liabilities, owner's equity, income, and expenses. That trial balance information is reported on Form 1065. So Ryan is going to show you how to enter information into a basic trial balance worksheet
Absolutely.
in a Form 1065.
Absolutely. And, I've been doing a lot of these presentations and I'm looking at the answers for the polling results. 96% of you got that right. So I think that might be a new high. You all are definitely doing a great job paying attention, or potentially maybe you already knew the answer as well. But really, if you are listening to this presentation today and you just kind of have it in the background, this next portion is going to be the most important that I personally am going to go over. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we are going to jump back into TaxWise Online. So let me tab alt over here. We're actually already at the trial balance worksheet. And like I was saying earlier, this is going to be the biggest difference between preparing a 1040 return and a 1065 or even an 1120S. We're looking at a 1065 today, but there's going to be very, very similar between the two. And if you're doing a 1040, there are typically a lot of different worksheets, right? If we have wages, there's a W-2 input sheet. If we have 1099 dividend, there's a dividend sheet, Schedule B. If we have a Schedule C, there's a Schedule C that we're basically typing on the form. Now, business returns are going to function a bit differently. This worksheet here is by far going to be, in my opinion, the most important worksheet within TaxWise Online, whether you're doing a business return or any other type of return, because there is going to be so much data that is input. But the beauty of it is this one worksheet is going to do the majority of the tax preparation for us. And just kind of looking at this particular item that we have here, you can see that all of this is zeroed out. And really, this page is going to be broken up between two categories. Right now, we're looking at balance sheet items. We have the assets, and we have on the left, on the right, we have our liabilities and equity. And as I was talking about earlier, these items are going to have to balance out. The software will do the calculation. Right now, we're perfectly in balance, and that's because we have no information within these columns. But we're actually going to start and focus with the below section. We're going to focus with the income and the expenses, and then we'll work our way back up to the assets and liabilities. Now, with the income and expenses, as you go through and type in this information into the return, it's going to start flowing to the different pages where this is applicable. And just to kind of give you a very basic example before we go a little bit more in depth, if we go to page 1 of the 1065 return and we go to our gross receipts and sales, it's 0. In fact, all of this is 0, right? Well, if we go back to our trial balance worksheet, we're going to scroll down once again. Let's go ahead and input some gross receipts and sales, and we'll say this business had $300,000. Once we input it here, this information is going to flow to any necessary place within the tax return. If we go back to page 1 of our 1065, there's the $300,000. We can see that it's calculating here, it's calculating here. Like, look how many places this is going. And this is one of the reasons why using this worksheet is going to be so beneficial. You input the information one time, and it's going to be constantly pushing to everywhere that it needs to be reported. And most businesses that I work with are fairly simple. There may be some sales, there may be some expenses, but one of the nice things about TaxWise is that it can be as in-depth or as simple as need be. And typically when doing a general overview presentation like we're on today, I'm not necessarily going to jump in to each and every item, but what I really want to do is just kind of go through some of the items that I see quite frequently and see if these are things that potentially could help you out as well. So items like farming income, I personally don't have any returns of farming income. If you do, you're probably more of an expert in it than me, but we have a field here to go and input it. Rentals could be a bit more common, as quite a few businesses do have rentals that they may be getting some income or expenses from, but we're also going to skip over that today and really focus on some of these other columns down below, things that I see quite frequently. And we're going to come back and talk about other income, but one of the things that you're going to see with TaxWise is there will be catch-alls if you have specific items that maybe don't neatly fit into one specific category. You always have an item like other income or other expenses where you can lump up the remaining items that may be within your trial balance and have a place to go ahead and report those. So going down, I am going to give it some taxable interest. We'll say there is $5,000. And we will go ahead and say there is $1,000 of tax exempt interest as well. And as we continue to go through, you can see that I'm really just kind of adding these numbers in haphazardly in no particular order. More likely what your input is going to look like is you will be using, where is it here? You will be using the trial balance and looking at the amounts that are listed within it for these specific sections. And just to kind of give you an example of this, let's actually go down to our expenses, as this is sometimes a bit easier to show. If we go to insurance or interest expenses of $3,000, so let's start with interest expense of $1,500. Well, when I go to the right-hand side of this part of the worksheet, these are my expenses. So income's on the left, expenses on the right. As we scroll down, I would find the interest, and I would match it up to my trial balance. So I believe that said $1,500. Let me just go and double check. It did. If we go to insurance, one line above, we have $3,000. So I would go find the insurance section. Like I did 30,000. Let's go ahead and change that back to 3,000. And this will be your general input. Now, earlier I was kind of adding in numbers just kind of to show the software calculating. But if we wanted to be proper and correct, I would go and find my gross receipt and sales. Well, it's actually $50,000. I would put too much in. I would change this to $50,000. And as you go through field by field, you will find the corresponding what is it. You will find the amount, and then you'll be inputting these amounts into your trial balance worksheet. And if you've never seen a trial balance before, a couple things to kind of know about it that may help you out is the numbering is going to be very important. You will also be reading the account names just to double check, but the numbering is usually going to give you a heads up as to what these particular items are. If we look at the first two items, account number 10,000 and 10,200, we'll look at this. These are both checking or cash accounts, bank accounts is really what I should say. And they're lumped together. If we go down to the next item, accounts receivable, well, this is right next to accounts payable, and one's a debit, one's a credit. So the TB is really going to be the item that's going to get you through preparing this return. And typically your assets, your liabilities, those will be listed up top. As you get down to some of these sections in the 50, 60,000s, these are more likely to be expenses. And if we were to go back and look at some of this information that we've input into our expense section, let me just make sure I have a few here. Let's go ahead and actually just put a few more in. Let's get some supplies, $900, continue to tab down. What's the miscellaneous? I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, as I think hopefully the point is pretty evident. But as we continue to scroll down, I do have miscellaneous. Well, there's not a miscellaneous category, is there? So I can just go and type directly into a field. All right, these will be my miscellaneous expenses. This will be my catch-all. So you're always going to have the option to just type in the information. If what you are seeing within your trial balance doesn't have a neat little home for it to go in within the worksheet that is listed here. And once we've gone and actually input some of this information, we're going to go ahead and navigate back to page 1 of the 1065. And as we scroll down, we can see, okay, our gross receipts have changed. And then here are the expense amounts that we've input into the software, and we're getting our total deductions. So really from this one worksheet, the vast majority of the return is going to be populated for us. And this is the reason why earlier I was saying a lot of times I find the business returns to be easier to complete than a 1040. A 1040, your tree has so many more items within it on the left-hand side where you're constantly clicking through back and forth. Well, it's kind of all just located right here. And one more thing to go over before we talk about the assets and the liabilities. There is an option to import a trial balance. Now, a couple things to really highlight and talk about with this, just to elaborate a bit further, is when importing a trial balance, it's either going to have to come from QuickBooks Online specifically, or it's going to have to come from Xero. And more or less, what it's going to do is it is going to take your trial balance, give you something that looks similar to this within the accounting software, and you're just going to be able to upload that file. And then based off the numbering and based off the naming conventions, it is going to fill out this worksheet from you. So you may not necessarily be having to go through and type in every field of information. Now, I will say that is for a perfect situation where we do have very reliable accounting records and financial statements, etc. I've done plenty of tax returns where maybe the financial information wasn't scribbled on a napkin, but definitely scribbled on a piece of paper. And when you get information like that, there may be a little bit more professional judgment that's going to have to go in as to where this information should be reported. But I think by and large, a lot of businesses at this point are using QuickBooks Online. They are using Xero. So you should hopefully, I will say hopefully, have a very reliable, very accurate source data that you're working to populate this information. And moving up from the income and the expenses, I want to go to the assets and liabilities. Now, this is going to be on the same, obviously on the same worksheet, but this is going to be a bit different. Income and expenses is really how much money did you make? What did you spend? What's your gross profit, right? Well, earlier and pretty consistently throughout this presentation, we've been talking about assets, we've been talking about liabilities, equity, and how this all must balance out together. Well, to input this information, we're going to go back to our trial balance, and we're going to start with the two items I was talking about with the cash. We have petty cash, we have regular checking account. Both of these are going to be items that need to be input into the cash section of this particular worksheet. And if we go back, actually, let me go double check the numbers. Looks like we have 104,450. Well, if we go to our cash section, there is just one field. You can see it's not breaking it down field by field. But we could add in one of those scratch pads that we were talking about earlier. Earlier, I showed you how to input a scratch pad into this. But for today's example, we're actually just going to go ahead and type in the amount. Let me just go and make sure I have the correct information. Here we go. And as we go back now and look at different page of the 1065, well, here's the amount that we just input. It's flowing through to our balance sheet that must balance. And with this balance sheet, there's four columns really with the A, B, C, and D. I think what's most important to really grasp those, you're going to have your beginning of the year balance. You're going to have your end of the year balance. I'm trying to highlight these, but it's kind of highlighting the whole left column here, but end of year, beginning of the year. Now, when it comes to the beginning of the year information, uh, this could pull from a couple of different places. Now, if you have done the tax return previously within the tax software, this amount's just going to pro forma or roll forward from the prior year. Uh, Many times you will not have to input the beginning balances. However, if you are new to TaxWise Online, if this is something that you're thinking about getting, this would be year one. There's most likely not going to be a prior year tax return for this to roll forward from. So you may find yourself going back to the prior year trial balance and typing in these amounts into the corresponding fields. However, the beauty of doing it this way, where you have your beginning and your ending balance, is that there will be calculations that occur down below to make sure that the changes that are happening from the beginning to the end of the year are being reported accurately. And if we go back to our TB worksheet, let's go ahead and continue to work through some of these different items. So I'm going to go back into PowerPoint. I'm going to go to my next section. Okay, we have accounts receivable, we have accounts payable. I think these are two fairly common items that are typically being reported time and time again. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we would go and find the corresponding section down below. I know accounts payable is the first one that shows up here. And this is typically, if they've received a good or service, but they have not yet paid for it, that's when you're going to see your accounts payable. And for our example, it looks like they had about $6,000. We would input the information. And if we scroll down to the bottom of this, well, we can see, okay, our balance sheet is indeed out of balance. And that's because I haven't finished with all of these items. And today we're not really going to go through each and every one of these items, as we don't really have the time to go through and show you how to balance. But just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, these are the two items that have to be the same exact dollar amount in order for the IRS to accept this return and say, okay, there are no errors with it. Now, we have a pretty good heads up that our information is correct, because if we go back into our trial balance, well, if we go down below the debits and the credits, this is the same number here. Eventually, once you go through and input all of this information, you are going to get the same number at this portion of your worksheet. If you have these two items, you will not be getting an error message saying that your TB is out of balance. Now, I cannot stress it enough. This is really going to be your bread and butter to getting a business return done. And it does take, in all honesty, a couple of returns to get comfortable with this if you've primarily been doing 1040s. But there's only so many different categories here, right? And once you get a handful of these returns under your belt, I think and I hope that you will find that this is a much easier way to get through a tax return. We really work with the one worksheet, and then everything else is being populated for us. So with all that being said, I am going to go ahead and turn this back over to Beverly, as we do need to talk about K1s. K1s are a very important thing, and the tax software is going to make the K1s for us. And you probably have some experience dealing with them, as a lot of 1040 clients are going to be part-time or full-time owners of either a partnership, have a 1041 return, or some sort of entity that maybe that income's passing through. But I'm going to leave that to Beverly to really dive into the weeds and give a proper explanation of. So I will go ahead and jump back into our PowerPoint. And Beverly, I will turn this over to you.
All right. And Ryan, thank you for that. It was great to actually see how it looks and works, and how a trial balance works in a partnership return, actually seeing a live presentation of it. So we're going to go on to what is a Schedule K1, and we're going to start with a polling question. So a partner in a partnership will receive a K1. So we're going to have that. We're going to see what y'all come up with, and then we'll actually look at a Schedule K1 and talk about it, just to kind of test your knowledge.
Votes are trickling in, but let's give everyone just a few seconds more to answer. All right, I think we're good to close the poll now.
Okay, you all are really good. It's true. A partner in a partnership will receive a Schedule K1, and they need that Schedule K1 so they can report their part of the income and expenses from that partnership on their 1040. All right, so let's go to the next slide and see what a Schedule K1 looks like. So this is an example of a partnerships K1. You can see the partnership's name over here. It's Bilco Partnership over here, and John Smith is a partner in the partnership return, and John Smith is a 40% owner in the partnership. So that means John is going to report on his 1040 40% of the profit and loss from the partnership. Now he doesn't have to calculate that. That's because the partnership gives him this K1. So you will see in line 1 that our box 1, line 1, ordinary business income. This is John's share of the partnership's income, 40% from Bilco's trade or business. And so this line 1 is going to be reported on page 2 of Schedule E on John's 1040. And if you scroll down a little bit more, there's line 5, interest, box 5, interest income. John reports on Schedule B. He takes this K1, reports on his Schedule B of his 1040, the interest of 1,017 here, as well as in line 6A, ordinary dividends, and line 6B, qualified dividends. Those will also be on Schedule B. So that is how the income, that's how John knows how to report on his 1040. And remember, the partnership does not pay tax. It flows through to the partners. All right, Ryan, do you want to show what that looks like in TaxWise?
Absolutely. And just to add a bit of color, I remember when I first started doing tax returns, I'd be doing the specifically with the 1040 return on individual. I'd be going through, doing the W-2, doing the 1099s, and it all seemed pretty simple. And K1s were, the first time you have that moment, you're like, oh, okay, this is a bit different. This can get a bit more complicated. However, the nice thing about TaxWise and really how this is all going to work is it is going to prepare the majority of the K1 for you within the business return. And if we actually look at our tree, let me zoom in again just so it's a bit easier to see. If we actually look at our tree on the left-hand side, well, here are both of my partners. I have Charles, I have James. The different pages that are going to be printed out are being reported underneath of here. Same sort of deal as before. We have our color coding. I know neither one of these is quite yet ready to be sent off to the individual partner. But very important to know, Beverly earlier said that 1065 is pretty much just an informational return. I believe that's the exact IRS classification that it has. And that's because if there are any taxes that are owed, well, it's not necessarily going to be owed on the 1065 return. It's going to be reported in the K1, and the different partners will pay those taxes on their 1040. So if we go to our first person here, Mr. Charles Cooley, and scroll down, first off, as we can see, we have our red underlines, just our little checks for information that may be missed, that the software can't necessarily calculate which IRS center that it's going to be filed at. So there will be some particular items that we have to go and input. However, going back to our green underlines, like we talked about earlier, and our black underlines, a lot of these are going to have green underlines, and this information is going to be pulling from various places within the tax software. So don't feel like you're going to have to go and type in each one of these fields that you're seeing within our example K1. By and large, the overwhelming majority of this is going to be calculated based off the inputs that you've put into the main information worksheet, or conversely into the trial balance worksheet that we looked at earlier. And as we continue to scroll down and go through this, we do have some payer information. Who is the partner? This will be something that you have to type in. You'll have to mark, okay, what kind of partner are they? You can see we have our red items kind of guiding us along through this. But once we get down to Section J is going to be very important. We have our basically percentages of how much of this particular entity do they own. Now, for this particular example, we're doing the Mars Art Gallery, I believe is the name of the company. Charles here is a 60% owner, just meaning that when we look at page 1 of our 1040 and we have items like income and expenses, well, this is all going to flow through into his K1, but it's going to do the calculation for us. So the 50,000 is for the partnership as a whole. Those percentages that we're looking at are going to be, okay, how much of this amount is Charles going to go ahead and report? So it's going to do that math for us based off, where is it, Section J, based off the inputs that we have here. And, occasionally these amounts may change, particularly if they invest maybe more money into the partnership. They're still putting in money to try to make it profitable, or really for whatever reason. If they put in money, these percentages could change. I think by and large, most of the returns I work for, they kind of stay the same year by year, but it's something to be aware of, that if they're putting in more cash or, giving it more assets, these amounts may change over time. That's why we have the beginning and the ending. Like I was saying, that most of the time these two are just going to go ahead and balance out, but occasionally you may see this change for those particular reasons. Now, as we start to go a bit further down this, here's going to be some other items that are calculating from the return. And where I really want to get to is going to be part 2. Now, as we go through and look at these amounts, if you've ever done a 1040 return, this is primarily where you're entering the activity that the partner has gone and reported from their business return. And very importantly, what I want to highlight and point out, printed. This will be calculated based off your inputs. Do not feel like if you're doing a 1040, for example, and reporting the K1, typically you're typing in these amounts into their 1040 to figure out what their taxes owed are. Well, the business return is just going to go ahead and do the calculations for you. So don't feel like you have to really go through and prepare this line by line. And that's really the key takeaway that I want to get across during this part of the presentation, as based off our inputs that we previously input, the K1 is by and large going to be reported for us. It's going to be prepared for us. And there's a few items, sure, where's the IRS center, who's the person, who's the taxpayer, did the capital accounts change? But when it comes to the actual bits that, can be calculated, the software is going to go ahead and do this for us. And if we go and switch over to James, our other K1, we are running a bit short on time, so I don't have a ton of time to really walk through this as much as maybe I wanted to. But what you're going to see, it's more or less going to be the same. Looks exactly the same. Inputs are the same. His amounts are going to be different because of the 40%. The first person we looked at, Charles, he owns 60. James only owns 40. So as we start to scroll down, these amounts, you can see they're all a little bit less because it's doing the calculation for us. So we have about just a few minutes left here. So what we're going to go ahead and do is I believe we have some questions that have come in during this presentation, and Beverly is going to answer a few of them. I don't think we're going to have time to get to each and every one of these questions, but if your question is not answered, we will do our best to either reach out to you, or you can always reach out to a sales consultant. Let them know what you're trying to ask, what you need to get answered, and typically they'll reach out to us after these presentations, and we can take a couple minutes and either do a one-on-one demonstration for you, or if it's something that's a bit more simple, maybe we'll kind of explain it in an email step by step and attach some screenshots for you. So with all that being said, Beverly, I'm going to let you answer a few of those questions, and then we'll shut down this presentation.
Sorry to interrupt. Let's do our last polling question before
we have one more.
if we can, just so that we don't forget about it.
Okay, and for the last polling question, just want to know that would you like a more in-depth demo and further details about TaxWise? I know that this is an exciting update that we have coming out here in just a few weeks, really. We're almost there. And if you need to feel like you need to dive in deeper than we could on this presentation, just let us know. We'd love to meet with you and help answer your questions and really dive in really even deeper to the specifics of these worksheets, how the software works, and really help you all get as comfortable as possible. So we'll go ahead and open this up for just maybe a minute or so. Let everybody go ahead and answer this, and then we will go and answer a few of these questions.
Right. It looks like everybody pretty much has answered. There is a question that I'm seeing, and some of you guys, I guess, have heard that there is going to be a Spanish learning portal. And you're absolutely right. That is true, and I'm glad you asked. We're unveiling the TaxWise Online Spanish Learning Portal, which is equipped with over 80 Spanish-speaking product videos. And it's designed to provide comprehensive resources to our Spanish-speaking community, ensuring that everyone has access to the tools and knowledge that they need. So basically in Spanish, there are some knowledge-based articles. There's a live and virtual chat support in Spanish, and you can create support cases. And of course, like I mentioned, there are some Spanish product videos. So is there time for maybe one more question? Okay, so can I prepare a return in TaxWise using a MacBook? Yes, as long as you've got an internet connection, because TaxWise Online is browser-based, you can prepare on a MacBook, a Chromebook, a smartphone. So that makes TaxWise very flexible. And, I think we're just going to have time for maybe one more question. Let's see. Is the Schedule K1 separately filed with the IRS? Schedule K1 is filed with the Partnership Return Form 1065. And then in addition, that partnership will distribute to each partner their very own personal K1 to report their share of income and losses on their 1040. And let's see, we've got about 2 minutes to go. There is another question about research, and we're not really able to show that today. But if you have any additional tax questions, and maybe it's not in the knowledge base, do you offer any type of tax research software? And that's a really good question. We do have something called Answer Connect, and that is something you can, when we reach out to you, or you can talk to your sales rep about Answer Connect.
Okay, and I think with all that being said, that's going to bring us kind of right at time, or at 2:59 Eastern. So just want to take a moment and thank everybody for joining today's presentation. I had a lot of fun getting this together, and I hope it was very knowledgeable and informative. And just one last time, want to reiterate that if you do have any other lingering questions, I know we couldn't get to all of them today, please reach out to a sales consultant. They'll let us know, and we will do our best to answer them. So with all that being said, I am going to go ahead and shut down today's presentation, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, good week.
Thank you, guys, and join us for the next one in a month.
Bye-bye.